I'm going to draw today from Charles Fontenay's book. It's entitled The Kien of Futsi, which translates loosely into the philosophy of Confucius. And it's a very thin book. It's kind of like it looks like a kid's book, to be honest with you. I don't know where it came from, but eventually I pulled it out of my bookcase and I started flipping through it and looking at it and reading the little sayings and such and writing down in interpretations. And this is one of those sayings. They're like short stories. Once a man and a woman met in a bazaar in Samarkand. This man and this woman were so ideally suited to one another that had they married, their love would have been a subject of legend for 1,000 years. But they did not become friends because the man spoke only Turkish and the woman spoke only Chinese, and each insisted the other learn their language if they were to converse. So, what are your thoughts on that little story there? And I'll
Well, oh,
go.
go ahead.
No, go.
I was going to say it points out how much um, flexibility us humans need to apply in our relationships, really into all aspects of life. Of course, my favorite, see life from a different perspective. It's really a sad little story. It's just so sad. It's like missed opportunities, as you're fond of saying.
Yeah, that was just the basic story. I think it started off with a gentleman came to the sage, or he came to the Tao Li, which is students, and to learn wisdom. And he noticed that there was a lot of arguing. So he went to the sage and he inquired as to why they were arguing. And this was the response they were given. So, and Sandy, what are your thoughts?
Well, I guess the lack of willingness to compromise was uh, probably a huge, well, and it was, I think the ultimatum is what I find interesting because each basically gave each other the ultimatum. Either you learn what I say or we're out of here. And they both seem to equally uh, take that tack on it. So they both lost, but um, uh, maybe that was each of their, I mean, they sounded like you said that individually they had this world of promise and world of giving each individually, but yet maybe that was their one flaw that they couldn't compromise, maybe. Or give up a little control because it sounded like a kind of a controlling thing on both sides. So I don't know, but it is sad. It is sad because the thought occurred to me that if each had done that, they probably would have found so much uh, growth and knowledge in each other's language that who knows which one they would have ended up using between the two of them, but it probably wouldn't have been nearly as daunting and unattainable as they thought it was. And once they got past that, that was their wall. And once they got the wall down, the possibilities are endless, I guess. It's too bad. Too bad.
Yeah, they were ideally suited to one another.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
and had they married, their love would have been legendary for 1,000 years.
Wow. Wow.
Yet they could not move past that barrier.
Hmm.
What are your thoughts, Sharon?
Well, I agree with what everybody else has said. I just it sounds like the word stubborn comes to mind, that they were just too stubborn to even take it a step further, which makes me wonder, would they have been such a good match anyway? If they were so stubborn right at the get-go, um, who knows? You know, they would have sounded to me like they would have had to get past quite a few things to be that end result of wonderful love and all of that. Um, yeah, yeah.
That we see this playing out today
Mhm,
across the globe. I don't even have to say in our political uh,
mhm,
landscape here,
mhm.
throughout the world, because the whole idea here is they did not become friends because the man spoke only Turkish and the woman spoke only Chinese. And each insisted the other learn their language in order to converse. We have leaders insisting that everybody bow to their wishes. And if they do not bow to their wishes, then they can have nothing. And it's not just one doing it, it's both sides, because a conversation, an agreement has to have two sides, and both sides are like that. You have to either do it my way or you get nothing. Then the other one says, well, you have to do it either my way or you get nothing. And in the end, what are we left with?
Nothing.
Often it's less than nothing. When we look at our globe and we see the conflict that's taking place, whenever we resort to conflict, whether it is verbal attacks or physical attacks or anything of that nature, whenever we resort to that, we have accomplished less than nothing because nobody gains. Sometimes nothing is better than nothing, than something or less. But the whole idea is that, what is it that I've got here? One of my notes is that it is not the language that prevents us from coming together. So it's not the ideas that prevents us from coming together. It's not the concept of compromise. Well, I'm getting ahead of myself, but it is the refusal to adapt to the needs of others that prevents us from coming together. Because that is essentially what they have said. The man spoke only Turkish and the woman spoke only Chinese, and each insisted the other learn their language if they were to converse. If we take that position, insisting that someone else essentially bow to our needs, what does that make us?
Selfish.
Selfish? How about you, Sharon? What does that make us?
Oh, I don't know, domineering.
Okay. Domineering.
Mhm.
How about you, Sandy?
Well, I mean, maybe dictator isn't the right word, but certainly someone who uh, forces their will on thousands and thousands of people is dictating. And of course, on a very simple level, very bullying, and probably has used bullying to get what they want for their whole life. So it's a lifestyle, and they are masters at it. So the more you do it, the more power you get, and the more intimidating you are to regular people. So I guess,
And the more important you think you are.
yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. And unfortunately, the more power you have, because people don't even know that they're giving up their own power to you, to that person. And that's a very dangerous thing. So, yeah.
I
That's
like I like that you use the word bullying, because interestingly enough, in this country, you read about all these organizations adopting these policies against bullying
Mhm.
and turn around and praise it. In this country, bullying is rewarded, which is very discouraging. And with that, there was something else that came to mind as you were talking. And it wasn't necessarily imposing one's will upon another, but it was the whole concept of controlling. Somebody mentioned that controlling and the need to be in control. And the interesting thing is that people associate with control with being in charge, or with well, dictator would be good, but it's not, doesn't quite sum it up, and I can't quite find the word there. But posturing is a good one, because you have two sides to everything. We know that. That is obvious. That is the whole concept of duality. There are two sides to everything. However, if both sides are posturing to cause the other one to offer a compromise, and the other side is doing the same thing, nothing is gained.
Mhm.
And a lot of our governments are caught up in this. And it's not just the governments. We have to keep in mind. And this was an observation that I noticed. When we look at our government and we see what's happening in our government, and then we look at the organizations that we may be affiliated with, and we look at those organizations, you've got the grand picture here, and then you've got the commercial here. You might discover that the commercial is mimicking the grand stage. It's just an observation, because, being part of I see the problems that are within it, that are going on, and I see the headlines of our government and the problems that's going on with the government, and how you've got essentially indecisiveness, because when you've got two sides that won't compromise, you have essentially indecisiveness. It's not confusion, it's an inability to make a decision. And you have this indecisiveness that just seems to be reflected in a lot of the other organizations. And not only have I seen it within, but I've heard stories about it happening in other large organizations as well. Essentially the same thing, different circumstances. The circumstances are always different, But the whole idea here is that nobody is willing to make a decision. And because no decision is made, everything just tends to ride on as it will. I think, let me look here real quickly. I think Dave Ellis put it very well when he said that many people manage life and their focus lies on the day to day activities with no intention to guide them, no intentions. And without any kind of intentions, we become indecisive. We go nowhere. We see it practiced out in organizations. And what are organizations? They're comprised of people,
Yep, little micro societies.
little micro societies. And what are we? We are a micro society within ourselves. We have all these thoughts and ideas rolling around in our brain here, our mind. And then to add to the internal confusion here, we're seeking to communicate with souls as well. And then we get their voices rattling around in our head. And pretty soon we have all this chatter. And because we have made no choice, no decision, no goals or anything, we're just kind of left. Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah. And a lot of people go through life like that. It's an interesting thing. So without, let me see, make sure I didn't lose anything in this. It's not the language that prevents us from coming together. It is the refusal to adapt to the needs of others that prevents us from coming together. This is much like the idea of individualism. We seek to be different so that others may see us, yet because all seek to be different, no one is seen. So what are your thoughts about that? I'll call upon Sharon. What are your thoughts about that? Because nobody's willing to compromise.
Well, we're, like you said, we're just nobody's gonna compromise, everything's gonna just stay the same. And people are just gonna become more miserable. And you feel like your hands are tied, you make no progress, you are just stuck in a hole. And in a lot of ways, I think you go backwards. And we're seeing that. We're seeing that a lot. There used to be a lot of progress, I felt like, in thoughts and acceptance of welcoming of Americans, welcoming fellow Americans, new Americans, whatever. Now I feel a lot of that is just there seems to be this trend to want to go back to something, that was never good to begin with, but was so hushed up. And now I just feel it's all falling backwards. I don't know what is going to happen with it, but it's not a good thing. It's not at all. I think as a country, we're in a really bad place, because the attitudes just are just over the top to me. They're just, yeah, I don't understand how people, I don't understand how people think, that some of these things are good, because they're the worst to me. They're horrible. So I don't know. We shall see. But the inactivity, like you said, inability to make a decision is not. It's certainly not moving us forward.
Oh, I had a great thing there, and then it just wandered out, wandered out. It was something that I had experienced in my experience. And how did I miss it? Ah, I see. I see now. And I think in one of our soul lessons, they talked about, or maybe in our discussion, we talked about the need for decay and growth.
Mhm.
And you talked about how it seemed like everything was growing, just growing abundantly. And and now everything is decaying abundantly. And the whole idea with this concept of growth and decay is one has to make way for the other. We do, it seems like these archaic thoughts and ideas are seeming to be more prevalent. Of course, that's the news grabbing a hold of them and holding them up and like a billboard and everything for us to take notice and such. But when you weed your garden, how do you know what is a weed and what is not?
Oh, that's trial and error.
Precisely. Precisely. That's what we're going through is a trial and error period. And not everything in the past is bad. But at the same time, not everything that is progressive is good. So we get this period to where everything is thrown up in the air or scattered on the top of the table, and we begin to sifting through it to find out what is what. And as we do that, we begin to get rid of what doesn't work. So what we're seeing playing out is with all of this is uh, uh, this weeding of the garden, this weeding of the garden.
Isn't our entire life trial and error?
Precisely. Our entire life is trial and error. In our entire life, we're weeding our garden. And when we don't weed our garden, we come back to what Dave Ellis said, that, you know, there are day-to-day activities with no intention to guide them. If we don't weed our garden, we have no intention. We have no purpose. That's essentially what intention is purpose. We have no purpose. So we have to find a way to nice thing about technology is it always messes up somewhere along the lines. But we have to find a way to where we can get this barrier out of the way. And that's what Confucius was talking about. In fact, this little story is entitled The Barrier. We have this barrier in the way, and this barrier a lot of times is ourselves. Because without compromise, there is nothing. Without compromise, there is separation. Without compromise, there is no evolution, no growth. And to compromise is to meet in the middle. And it is compromise that allows us to reach decisions. So, what are your thoughts, Beth?
Well, that's all very true. The word inertia kept popping up in my head during that talk before you went into the growth and decay.
You said inertia, right?
Inertia. And I really don't know anything about physics or anything, but it just seems that there's going to be some kind of force opposing inertia if you wait long enough.
It's
Okay,
called
some-
friction.
I thought it was might be some kind of de-evolution
Nope.
process.
But friction can be a de-evolution process.
Oh, and the other thing that I was thinking of, people not willing to budge, that just to me boils down to, a fear-based response. I don't know. I don't know what will happen if I change my mind on this. So I'm just not going to change my mind.
Well, that would be stubbornness.
Yeah.
The inability to change your mind, choosing not to change your mind. But when you choose not to change your mind, and when we look back at this little phrase here, that the man only spoke Turkish and the woman only spoke Chinese, and each insisted the other learn their language if they were to converse, does not necessarily speak of stubbornness, but it could also speak of pride.
Mm.
Because why do people go through this posturing process? And again, when we look at our political system that's going on right now, the political landscape is a perfect example. But this is not just happening on the political landscape. It's happening across the country. When you've got this pride, people just don't want to budge. It's not necessarily that they're afraid of budging. They're insistent. You could say they're too full of themselves to recognize a benefit. They only see themselves. Trying to think of a good way to put it. Because the colloquial term is they're too full of themselves to get out of the way. And that's what we see with these people here, is they're too full of themselves. And as I said with the part before that I didn't include in my notation here, the person comes to the Taoli, which is a group of people seeking to learn from Confucius, and he hears them arguing amongst themselves, and he's questioning, why are they arguing amongst themselves when they come here to learn? And they're arguing amongst themselves because they're too proud of themselves to admit that they could be wrong. There's that pride again. To admit that they could be wrong. We have leaders that say they are representing their constituencies and such, and that this is what my constituency wants and everything. But are they promoting what their constituency wants? Are they promoting what their followers would prefer? And you see this in organizations as well. Are the leaders promoting those who put them in power? Are they promoting what it is that they want, what benefits them? And when you reach this point to where, the Turkish man says, you have to learn to speak my language, and the Chinese woman says, you have to learn to speak my language, there's nothing happening there. And it's not because one wants to be more stubborn than the other. They're too full of themselves. They're too busy promoting their private agenda and not willing to share with anybody else. And I have no idea why I selected this. I just wanted to talk about something other than spiritualism, because it seemed like we were talking about spiritualism for quite a while. And I thought, well, let's break this up. And this just happened to be what came up.
Mm.
So what are your thoughts about all of this, Beth?
Oh, it's a good talk, and you're right. It is a nice break because I think it can kind of shake up the right and left hemisphere in your brain, get you seeing things a little bit differently, or just kind of get you out of a plane of expectation. It's like, oh, this is totally different. It's shifting of gears.
And I know Connie came in late, but what I like about Connie is she's always got an opinion. So what are your thoughts, Connie?
I don't know. Like I say, I missed most of it. So other than we're all just experimenting. Every day, but it's an experiment.
Yeah, that's and you were right. Isn't life trial and error? Yes, life is trial and error. It's a good point to bring up.
Yeah.
And we have to realize that we're going to screw up. We're going to make mistakes. And what helps us get through those mistakes is saying, oops, I'm sorry. Let's try this a different way.
Well, and sometimes people, with me as an example, will make the same mistake repeatedly. It's slow to learn, I guess.
Yeah, I have that habit sometimes myself. But again, that's part of life. And it comes back to, again, with what Dave Ellis was saying, intention, living. And it's not necessarily living life with intention or living life with purpose, but more along the lines of know what it is that you're doing.
Have I ever known what I was doing?
Yeah, sometimes.
Occasionally. It happens.
So, what are your thoughts, Sharon?
Yeah, I don't know. I appreciate everybody's input here because it certainly brings home the humanity in all of us. Yeah, do I know what I'm doing half the time? Probably not. And maybe that's because, like you said, we go through our day without intention. So it's rote, it's just doing the same thing over and over and maybe expecting a different result, and hence making the same mistake twice or more. So yeah, it just makes me feel like I'm not alone in this boat.
Yeah. And Sandy, have I called on you yet? What are your thoughts?
Well, I do. This has been a really enlightening little talk from that one little experience that you shared with us in the beginning. It's really blossomed into a lot of good thought. Um, yeah, and maybe maybe a little hope that you know hope that I don't know, that we can work our way out of where we are because we need to do that inertia, like Beth said. Maybe we can start to envision a purpose more than just sitting and doing nothing. And hopefully, we can start to really grow, because I don't think there's a lot of that going on right now. And like Sharon said, I think more than ever, there's a lot of regression, which I never thought I'd ever see in my life. But it's happening. So, hope springs eternal. We have to keep hoping that love will prevail. And, the all-encompassing love will prevail.
Here's a couple of things that you might find encouraging.
Mm-hmm.
Progress or evolution has its own inertia. It continuously carries us forward, and we have no choice but to go forward. No choice at all. And when they talk about Mercury being in retrograde, Mercury cannot go around the sun and then all of a sudden change its direction. It just can't happen. But what retrograde means, and that's what Sharon is actually talking about, not regression, but retrograde. What retrograde means is it appears to be moving backwards. And when Mercury is in retrograde, it appears to be moving backwards, but it's not. And that's what we're seeing with some of these topics. I can't think of the word again that's being brought up. Some of this stuff that's surfacing from the past. It's not that we're regressing, but we're going through this retrograde. It's part of weeding the garden. You yank that weed out, and then 2 weeks later, what the hell's going on? I just pulled this weed not more than a few days ago. And you pull it out again. That's what we're experiencing. It's not that we're going backwards or anything. It's still part of the continuous progression, the continuous evolution. And I want to come back to and emphasize what I got out of this little story from Confucius. And that is, without compromise, there is nothing. If we stand our ground there and insist that we not budge, that you're the one who's got to, we've lost. Compromise is key. Without compromise, there is separation. That's all that can happen. The man who spoke only Turkish and the woman who spoke only Chinese and insisting that the other learn their language if they were to converse, they separated. They just turned around and walked away. They didn't engage or anything. Separation. Without compromise, there is separation. Without compromise, there is no evolution. Evolution is all about growth. Evolution is just a fancy way of saying growing. And if you're not growing, you're decaying. So without compromise, you're not growing, you're decaying. Because whatever it is that you want is going nowhere. And if it's not going anywhere, it begins to fall apart. It's just the way things work. So to compromise is to meet somewhere in the middle. And when we come together and meet in the middle, it's not that it's a win-win situation, but together we grow stronger, our potential increases, we're just better together. I think it's a cliche, better together. It's just the way it is. You look at nature. There's no separation in nature. Everything works together. And because everything works together, it's better until some developer comes along and wants to put up condominiums. Ah,
It's better together for years, but in a different context.
yeah. I mean, there is no single way to be together, but the whole idea is to come together. That's what compromise means. We come together, and that's the whole idea with this. When we work with souls, we're coming together with souls. When we do it as a circle, we all come together, and by coming together, we're stronger. There's a stronger resonance, a stronger vibration. There's more harmony. And, just look at nature. Nature's been doing this for eons. And it's not a bad thing, obviously. So I want to thank all of you for sharing your thoughts in this, for teaching each other. Fantastic. And I want to thank you for allowing me to share this with you.